The early morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres adjusted the strap of his army green duffel bag, feeling the weight of it dig into his shoulder. After 14 months in a combat zone, even this small discomfort felt strangely comforting, a reminder that he was finally back on American soil. Michael had been deployed 3 times during his military career, but this last tour had been the toughest. As a combat medic, he'd seen things that would stay with him forever. The faces of wounded soldiers he'd patched up under gunfire, the children he'd treated in rural villages, and the 2 friends he couldn't save despite his best efforts. His hands, now clutching his boarding pass, had performed emergency surgeries in conditions most doctors couldn't imagine. The airport buzzed with morning activity. Business travelers rushed past with coffee cups and rolling suitcases, while families herded sleepy children toward their gates. Michael walked slowly, taking it all in. After so many months of dust, danger, and military precision, the ordinary chaos of civilian life felt almost overwhelming. "Thank you for your service," a middle-aged man in a business suit said as he passed by, noticing Michael's uniform. Michael nodded with a small smile. He'd received similar comments a dozen times since landing for his connecting flight, and while he appreciated the sentiment, each one reminded him of the gap between his experiences and those of the people around him. Michael checked the time on his phone, still 2 hours before his final flight home. His mom, dad, and younger sister would be waiting for him at the arrival gate, probably with one of those homemade signs his sister loved to make. The thought made his throat tight with emotion. During his darkest moments overseas, it was their faces he'd conjured up to keep going. Finding a relatively quiet spot near his gate, Michael sat down and pulled out his water bottle. His uniform felt stiff and formal compared to the casual clothes of other travelers, but he wore it with pride. The decision to travel in uniform hadn't been for attention. It was partly practical since his dress clothes were packed away, and partly out of respect for 2 soldiers from his unit who didn't make it home. As he took a drink, he noticed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, staring at him from across the waiting area. The boy whispered something to his mother, who looked over at Michael and smiled. After a moment's hesitation, they approached. "My son has a question for you, if you don't mind," the woman said. Michael straightened up. "Sure, what can I help you with?" The boy looked down at his sneakers. "Are you a real soldier?" "Thomas, that's not what we talked about asking," his mother said, looking embarrassed. Michael laughed gently. "It's okay. Yes, I am a real soldier. I'm a medic, kind of like a doctor in the army." Thomas's eyes widened. "Did you help people who got hurt?" "I did. That was my job." Like a superhero, Michael felt a lump in his throat. He thought about Rodriguez, who'd lost his leg to an IED, and Chen, who'd taken shrapnel protecting a local child. Those were the real heroes. No, not a superhero, just doing my job. But I worked with some pretty amazing people. The boy seemed satisfied with this answer. His mother thanked Michael and gently led her son away, but not before Thomas gave Michael a solemn salute, which he returned with equal seriousness. These small interactions helped ease Michael back into civilian life, a transition he knew wouldn't be simple. His previous homecomings had taught him that the real challenges often began after the welcome home hugs and celebrations faded. The nightmares, the startling at loud noises, the struggling to explain his experiences to people who couldn't possibly understand, those were hurdles he'd face again. An announcement for priority boarding at a nearby gate caught his attention. A small group of elderly veterans wearing Vietnam-era caps were being escorted onto their flight. One of them, noticing Michael, gave him a knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared brotherhood. Michael nodded back, feeling a connection that transcended the decades between their service. He checked his phone and saw a new message from his sister. "Terminal decorated. Mom already crying. Dad pretending he's not. Hurry up and get here." Attached was a photo of a welcome home banner they'd made. Michael smiled at the familiar handwriting and heart decorations. The airport continued to fill as morning flights arrived. Michael watched a reunion happening nearby, a man in a business suit dropping his bags to scoop up 2 running children. The man's wife approached more slowly, tears streaming down her face as they embraced. Michael looked away, giving them privacy in their moment, but the scene reminded him of his own homecomings. There was always that split second, just before seeing his family, when time seemed suspended between his military life and his civilian one. His phone buzzed with another message, this time from an Army buddy who'd returned home 3 months earlier. "Ground safe yet, Doc?" It was their inside joke. Ground safe was what they'd called successfully completed missions. "Almost," Michael texted back. "One more flight to go." The reply came quickly. "The real mission starts now. Call if you need backup." Michael appreciated the offer more than his friend probably realized. The statistics on returning veterans struggling with reintegration weren't just numbers to him. They were faces of people he knew. He'd made a promise to himself during the long flight back that he'd reach out for help if the adjustment became too difficult. No more going it alone like after his first tour. Stretching his stiff legs, Michael decided to walk around before his next flight. The terminal was a good place to practice being around crowds again. In combat zones, crowds meant danger, places where hidden threats could lurk. Here, they were just ordinary people living ordinary lives, something he hoped to return to soon. As he walked, an announcement came over the PA system asking passengers to report any unattended bags. Michael noticed how several people looked nervously at their surroundings. The world had changed since he'd first enlisted. Now everyone lived with a small edge of the vigilance that had become second nature to him. Near a coffee shop, a group of flight attendants and pilots talked among themselves. One of them, a captain with silver hair, made eye contact with Michael and stepped away from his colleagues. "Heading home, Sergeant?" The captain asked. "Yes, sir. Final leg in about an hour." The captain extended his hand. "Dave Wilson, United Airlines. We appreciate everything you folks do out there." Michael shook his hand. "Thank you, sir. I flew transport in the Gulf War before commercial. Not nearly what you've been through, but I get it. The coming home part, it takes time." Michael nodded, surprised by the captain's insight. "If you're ever flying my route and need anything, you let the crew know," Captain Wilson continued. "We take care of our own." After they parted ways, Michael realized these brief connections were helping to bridge the gap between worlds. Each person who acknowledged his service was, in a small way, helping to welcome him back. Finding his way to a quiet corner with a view of the runways, Michael watched planes taking off and landing with clockwork precision. The order of it appealed to him after months in unpredictable environments. He took out the small notebook he'd kept during his deployment and flipped through his sparse entries. Mostly names of people he'd met, both fellow soldiers and locals, with small notes about their interactions. It was his way of holding on to humanity in a place where it was easily lost. The last entry was from 2 days ago, written while waiting for his transport home. "Coming back different. Hope they understand." He closed the notebook, wondering if his family would notice the changes in him. Some were obvious. The new scar along his forearm, the slight limp from a minor injury that hadn't fully healed. Others were beneath the surface, harder to see but more significant. An announcement for his flight brought Michael back to the present moment. He gathered his things and headed toward the security checkpoint. Unlike other passengers, he moved with deliberate awareness, scanning his surroundings not out of fear but from deeply ingrained habit. 14 months of staying alive in hostile territory had shaped his movements in ways he wasn't even conscious of anymore. As he approached the security line, he noticed how people reacted to his uniform, some with respect, others with curiosity, and a few with what seemed like discomfort. America had complicated feelings about its wars and those who fought them. Michael understood this better than most. He had his own complicated feelings about what he'd been part of. Standing in line, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning, he found an elderly woman smiling up at him. "My grandson is overseas now," she said. "Army like you. Whenever I see one of you coming home safe, it gives me hope." Michael smiled genuinely. "What's your grandson's name?" "Robert. He's in communications. Communications is crucial." "We couldn't function without them," Michael said, meaning it. "I'm sure he's doing important work." The woman beamed with pride. "That's what he says, but you know how boys downplay things." As the line moved forward, Michael saw that he was approaching the security checkpoint where his journey home would continue. What he didn't know was that this routine screening would become anything but ordinary, setting in motion events that would test his patient's dignity and ultimately bring to light issues larger than his personal journey home. Michael approached the security checkpoint with the practiced patience of someone used to waiting. The line moved steadily, Passengers removing shoes, emptying pockets, and placing laptops in separate bins. After years in the military, these small procedures felt like second nature to him. Order and protocol were the backbone of his daily life. He watched as the elderly woman who had spoken to him about her grandson passed through the metal detector without issue. The security officer, a friendly-faced woman in her 50s, smiled and waved her through. Michael was next, gathering his items into the gray plastic bins: phone, wallet, keys, watch, and finally his worn combat boots placed carefully beside them. As he stepped toward the metal detector, a different security officer stepped forward, holding up his hand to stop Michael. This officer was taller than the others, with cold eyes and a rigid posture. His name tag read Officer Dawson. "Step aside for additional screening," Dawson said, his voice flat. Michael nodded and moved to where the officer pointed. He was used to random screenings and had no reason to think anything was unusual. "Arms out," Dawson ordered, his tone noticeably harsher than it had been with previous passengers. Michael complied, standing with his arms outstretched as Dawson began the pat-down. The officer's movements were rough, almost aggressive. Nothing like the professional courtesy Michael had experienced during previous airport screenings. "Is there a problem, sir?" Michael asked calmly. Dawson didn't answer, instead motioning for another officer to come over. "Check his bags thoroughly," he said to his colleague, emphasizing the word thoroughly while staring directly at Michael. The second officer, a younger man who looked uncomfortable with the situation, hesitated before picking up Michael's duffel bag. "Yes, sir," he said, avoiding eye contact with both Dawson and Michael. By now, other travelers were watching the scene unfold. The normal flow of the security line had slowed as Dawson continued his unusually extensive search of Michael. "Your ID and orders," Dawson demanded, holding out his hand. Michael reached for the documents in his pocket, moving slowly and deliberately. "My orders and military ID are right here, sir," he said, keeping his voice even. He'd dealt with difficult people in high-pressure situations before. This was nothing compared to negotiating with local officials in conflict zones. Dawson snatched the documents and examined them with obvious skepticism. "Torres," he said, drawing out the name. "Where exactly are you coming from, Torres?" The emphasis on his last name didn't escape Michael's notice, nor did the dismissive way Dawson was handling his military identification. Still, he answered politely, "Returning from my third tour, sir. Just landed from Germany, connecting through to Nashville." "Third tour, huh?" Dawson's tone was mocking. "And what exactly do you do in this uniform?" Michael felt a flash of anger but kept it contained. "I'm a combat medic, sir. Staff sergeant with the 47th Medical Battalion." Meanwhile, the younger officer had opened Michael's duffel bag and was methodically removing the contents. Neatly folded clothes, a few books, a sealed envelope of photos, and a small box wrapped in brown paper that contained a gift for his sister. "What's this?" Dawson asked, pointing to the box. "A birthday present for my sister," Michael explained. "It's a carved wooden box I picked up overseas." "Open it," Dawson ordered the younger officer. The young man hesitated again. "Sir, it's wrapped." "I said open it," Dawson repeated more firmly. As the young officer reluctantly began to unwrap the gift, a woman in line spoke up. "Is this really necessary? He's in uniform, for goodness sake." Dawson turned toward her with a cold stare. "Ma'am, I'm doing my job. Security doesn't take holidays, even for people in costume." The word costume hung in the air. Several passengers exchanged looks of disbelief. Michael felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. "It's not a costume, sir," he said quietly. "I've been serving overseas for 14 months. "Yeah, well, uniforms can be bought in any Army surplus store," Dawson replied dismissively. "And some people will do anything for special treatment." The atmosphere at the checkpoint had changed dramatically. The efficiency of the line had dissolved completely, as more passengers stopped to watch what was happening. Michael noticed a few people taking out their phones, though whether they were recording or simply checking the time, he couldn't tell. The young officer had unwrapped the gift by now, a beautifully carved wooden box with intricate patterns. He opened it carefully to reveal a delicate glass bird inside, miraculously still intact. "It's just a glass figurine," he said to Dawson, his discomfort with the situation increasingly evident. Dawson barely glanced at it. "Put it all back through the scanner. Separate bins for each item. This would mean at least 5 or 6 more bins. a process that would take significant time. As the young officer began separating Michael's belongings, Dawson turned back to Michael's documents. "These look convenient," he said. "Let me check if they're even real." Michael took a deep breath. He'd faced worse intimidation tactics than this. But something about being treated this way on American soil, in the uniform he wore with pride, cut deeper than expected. "Those documents are legitimate, sir," he said calmly. "You're welcome to verify them with my commanding officer. His contact information is listed." Dawson's expression hardened. "Don't tell me how to do my job, Torres. For all I know, you could be anybody." By now, the line behind Michael had grown considerably, with passengers exchanging confused and concerned glances. The supervisor at the checkpoint, a woman with short gray hair, had noticed the commotion and was making her way over. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, looking between Michael and Dawson. Before Dawson could answer, Michael spoke. "No problem, ma'am. Just a thorough security check." His diplomatic response seemed to irritate Dawson even more. "I'm conducting additional screening on this individual," Dawson told his supervisor. "I have concerns about his documentation." The supervisor glanced at Michael's uniform and the scattered contents of his bag, then at the growing line of passengers. "Officer Dawson, can I speak with you for a moment?" As they stepped aside, Michael remained standing with his arms at his sides, aware of the eyes on him. He'd been trained to handle high-pressure situations with composure, to never escalate conflicts when civilians were present. Those skills were being tested now in a way he hadn't expected. From nearby, he could hear snippets of the conversation between Dawson and his supervisor. "Standard procedure doesn't require my discretion to determine backing up the entire checkpoint." When they returned, the supervisor addressed Michael directly. "Staff Sergeant, thank you for your patience. We'll expedite the rest of your screening." Dawson's face flushed red, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he muttered something under his breath as he roughly pushed one of Michael's bins through the scanner. Michael didn't catch all of what was said, but he clearly heard two words, a racial slur followed by "soldier." The slur wasn't shouted, but in the tense quiet that had fallen over the checkpoint, it carried. Several gasps came from the passengers in line. The young officer recoiling Michael's belongings froze, his eyes widening in shock. The supervisor, who had been turning to walk away, stopped abruptly. Michael felt a cold wave wash over him. In that moment, he had a choice to make: respond with the anger he rightfully felt, or handle the situation with the dignity his uniform represented. The decision took less than a second. "Excuse me, Officer Dawson," Michael said, his voice steady and clear enough to be heard by everyone nearby. "I didn't quite catch what you said." The checkpoint went completely silent. Dawson, realizing his comment had been heard, stared back at Michael with defiance rather than regret. "I said," Dawson replied, lowering his voice but maintaining eye contact, "that this checkpoint doesn't need your kind slowing things down." The supervisor stepped forward immediately. "Officer Dawson!" But Michael raised his hand slightly, a gesture asking for a moment to speak. When he did, his voice remained calm and measured. "Officer Dawson, I've spent the last 14 months in places where people are judged by the content of their character and the actions they take when lives are on the line. I've treated soldiers of every background and belief. I've held the hands of dying men who cared only that someone was there with them at the end. Not what that person looked like." Michael paused, aware that nearly everyone at the checkpoint was listening now. "I don't know what experiences have shaped your view of me," he continued, "but I'd like to think that here, in the country I've been serving, we can aspire to something better than snap judgments based on a name or appearance." Dawson's face had gone from flushed to pale, though his expression remained hard. Whatever response he might have given was cut short by his supervisor, who stepped between them. "Officer Dawson, you're relieved for the remainder of this shift. Report to my office immediately," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Then, turning to Michael, her tone softened. "Staff Sergeant Torres, on behalf of the Transportation Security Administration, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Please come with me and we'll complete your screening right away." As Dawson stalked away, the younger officer finished repacking Michael's bag with careful attention, handling the rewrapped gift with particular care. "I'm sorry about your present," he said quietly. "And everything else." Michael nodded in acknowledgement. "It's all right. The box is sturdy. It survived worse than this getting here." The supervisor escorted Michael to another lane, where his screening was completed quickly and professionally. As he collected his belongings, he became aware of the other passengers watching him, not with curiosity now, but with something that looked like respect. What Michael didn't yet realize was that several of those phones had indeed been recording, and that his measured response to blatant discrimination was already being shared beyond the walls of the terminal. As he walked toward his gate, the wheels of justice were beginning to turn behind him. Michael walked away from the security checkpoint with his composure intact, but his heart was pounding. In 14 months of deployment, he'd faced mortar fire, treated wounds under impossible conditions, and navigated cultural differences in high-stakes situations. Yet somehow this encounter on American soil had shaken him in a different way. He found a quiet corner near his gate and sat down, placing his duffel bag between his feet. He needed a moment to collect himself before boarding. His hands were steady, they always were, even in crisis, but his mind was racing. "Excuse me, Staff Sergeant Torres?" Michael looked up to see the young security officer who had searched his bag standing awkwardly in front of him. The officer was off duty now, his TSA jacket folded over his arm. "Officer," Michael checked the name tag. "Chen, what can I do for you?" Chen shifted his weight nervously. "I wanted to apologize properly. What happened back there wasn't right." "You don't need to apologize," Michael said. "You were just doing your job." "No, I wasn't," Chen replied, his voice gaining confidence. "My job is to ensure security while treating people with respect." "I should have spoken up sooner." He hesitated, then added, "Officer Dawson has a history of this kind of behavior, but nobody's been able to prove a pattern." Michael studied the younger man, recognizing the moral struggle in his eyes, the conflict between loyalty to colleagues and standing up for what's right. He'd seen it before in new recruits facing ethical dilemmas. "What's your first name?" Michael asked. "Kevin," the officer replied. "Well, Kevin, sometimes the hardest part of any job is knowing when to follow orders and when to question them." Michael gestured to the seat next to him. "Do you have a minute?" Kevin sat down, still clutching his folded jacket. "I've only been with TSA for 7 months. Dawson's been there 8 years. Let me tell you something I learned overseas," Michael said. "The right thing to do rarely gets easier with time. Usually the longer you wait, the harder it gets." As they talked, Michael noticed a small crowd gathering nearby. 3 people approached, a woman in a business suit, an older man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, and a middle-aged man in a pilot's uniform. "Sorry to interrupt," the woman said. She held out a business card. "I'm Lisa Wong, an attorney. I witnessed what happened at security, and I want you to know I recorded the entire interaction." Michael took her card, surprised. "You recorded it?" "Yes, and so did at least 6 other passengers. It's already circulating online." She glanced at her phone. "Actually, it's gaining traction pretty quickly." The older veteran stepped forward next, extending a weathered hand. "Doug Reynolds, 173rd Airborne, Vietnam. What you did back there took guts, son. Standing your ground without losing your cool. That's the mark of a real soldier." Michael shook his hand, feeling a connection that transcended the decades between their service. "Thank you, sir. Just trying to handle things the right way." "Well, you did," Reynolds said firmly, "and I've already placed a call to my contact at the Veterans Affairs office. They'll want to hear about this." The pilot introduced himself next. "Captain William Foster, American Airlines. Not only did I witness the incident, but I've already spoken with our airline's military liaison. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior toward anyone, especially not military personnel." Kevin Chen looked increasingly uncomfortable. "I should go make my statement to the supervisor," he said, standing up. "Staff Sergeant Torres, thank you for your service and for the conversation." He nodded respectfully before walking away. As Chen left, another person approached, the woman who had first spoken up in line at the security checkpoint. "I've filed a formal complaint," she announced without preamble. "My brother served 2 tours in Iraq. The way that officer treated you was disgraceful." Michael was overwhelmed by the support. In the field, his unit had operated like a well-oiled machine, each person doing their part without need for discussion. This spontaneous rallying of strangers felt different, but equally powerful. "I appreciate everyone's concern," he said, "but please don't let this incident disrupt your travels." "I'm fine, really," Lisa Wong shook her head. This isn't just about one incident or one person, Staff Sergeant. This is about accountability. May I sit down? I'd like to explain your options. As she took the seat Kevin had vacated, Lisa outlined the potential for a formal complaint with the Department of Homeland Security, possibly even a civil rights case. Michael listened carefully, but something didn't sit right with him. Ms. Wong, he finally said, I understand the legal angles, but I'm not looking to punish Officer Dawson or damage his career permanently. What I'd like is for this to be a learning opportunity, not just for him, but for the system. Lisa studied him with newfound respect. That's refreshingly thoughtful. Most people in your position would want blood. I've seen enough damage in the world, Michael replied simply. Adding more doesn't help anyone. Captain Foster, who had been listening to their conversation, nodded in agreement. What are you proposing instead? Before Michael could answer, an airport security supervisor approached their growing group. It wasn't the same woman from before, but someone more senior based on her uniform. Staff Sergeant Torres? She extended her hand. I'm Diana Peterson, Chief of Security Operations for this airport. Could I have a word with you in private? Michael excused himself from the group and followed Peterson to a quiet corner of the terminal. Her expression was grave but respectful. First, let me apologize on behalf of the entire security team, she began. What happened today is completely unacceptable. I appreciate that, Michael said. The incident has already reached the regional director's office, Peterson continued. Officer Dawson has been placed on immediate administrative leave pending an investigation. We've retrieved the security footage and combined with the passenger videos, the evidence is quite clear. Michael nodded slowly. May I ask what happens next? Peterson sighed. Honestly, in cases like this, we typically offer a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement to avoid publicity. But this is already public, and frankly, I'm not interested in covering it up. I'm glad to hear that, Michael said, because I have a different suggestion. Peterson looked surprised. I'm listening. Instead of simply firing Officer Dawson, what if this became an opportunity for better training? Not just for him, but for all security personnel? Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice earnest. Look, I've worked in high-stress environments where split-second judgments are necessary. I understand the pressure. But I've also seen what happens when those judgments are clouded by prejudice. Peterson was quiet for a moment. What exactly are you suggesting? A comprehensive review of your training protocols. Workshops on unconscious bias. Maybe even having veterans like myself come in to speak about our experiences. Michael paused. I don't want Officer Dawson's career destroyed. I want him and others like him to do better. As they continued their discussion, more passengers stopped by the group Michael had left, sharing their contact information with Lisa and Captain Foster. The story was spreading through the terminal, with people showing each other videos on their phones. Reynolds, the Vietnam veteran, had made more calls and was speaking animatedly to someone about organizing a response from various veterans groups. The atmosphere had shifted from shock to purposeful action. When Michael returned to the group, he found that it had grown to include 2 more off-duty pilots, a flight attendant, and several other passengers who had witnessed the incident. The airport security chief and I have discussed some possibilities, Michael told them. They're taking this seriously, and so am I. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge or public shaming. It's about making things better for everyone. Lisa looked skeptical. Sometimes public pressure is the only thing that creates real change. And sometimes, Michael replied gently, it just creates more division. I've seen enough of that to last a lifetime. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement for boarding priority for military personnel on Michael's flight. As he gathered his things, Captain Foster put a hand on his shoulder. They're calling your flight, but this isn't over. We won't let it be, he promised. You focus on getting home to your family. We'll handle things here. Reynolds nodded in agreement. Son, you fought for us over there. Let us fight for you here. Michael was touched by their determination. As he prepared to board, he looked back at the unlikely alliance that had formed in his wake. A civil rights attorney, an airline captain, a Vietnam veteran, and a growing circle of concerned citizens. For the first time since the incident, he smiled. Perhaps this was what he had been fighting for all along, not just abstract concepts of freedom and justice, but the living, breathing reality of people standing up for what's right. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, Michael felt his phone vibrate with incoming messages. His family had somehow heard about what happened and were checking if he was okay. News traveled fast in the digital age. His sister's text made him laugh out loud. Only you could start a movement before even getting home. Mom's worried, Dad's proud, and I'm still waiting for my present. Hurry up already! With that small moment of normalcy, Michael boarded his flight knowing that behind him, wheels of justice had been set in motion, not through anger or retaliation, but through the quiet dignity of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in its best. Michael settled into his seat by the window, watching ground crews load the last of the luggage onto the plane. The adrenaline from the confrontation was finally wearing off, leaving him tired but clear-headed. He pulled out his phone to switch it to airplane mode and noticed dozens of notifications flooding in. Text messages, social media alerts, and emails from people he hadn't spoken to in years. One notification caught his eye, a link to a news website sent by his army buddy with the message, "You're trending, Doc." With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, Michael tapped the link. The headline read, "Decorated Combat Medic Faces Discrimination at Atlanta Airport. Responds with Dignity." Below it was a still image from one of the videos, showing Michael standing tall as Officer Dawson glared at him. The article had already been shared thousands of times. Michael quickly skimmed the article before the flight attendant announced it was time to turn off electronic devices. The piece quoted several witnesses and included a statement from the airport acknowledging the incident and promising a full investigation. There was no official comment yet from the TSA. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Michael leaned his head against the window, processing everything that had happened. This wasn't the homecoming he had imagined during those long nights overseas. Part of him wished he could just quietly reunite with his family without all the attention. Another part recognized that perhaps this incident could lead to something important. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, the group of witnesses had moved their impromptu meeting to the airport restaurant. Lisa Wong, the attorney who had recorded the incident, had taken charge, coordinating their efforts with practiced efficiency. "I've set up a shared document where we can all input our contact information and what we witnessed," she told the group, which had now grown to 11 people. "The more detailed our accounts, the stronger our case will be." Captain Foster was on his phone speaking quietly but intensely. "Yes, sir. I understand the airline's position, but I was a first-hand witness. No, this isn't about publicity. Yes, I can hold for the director." Doug Reynolds, the Vietnam veteran, had connected with 2 other veterans in the airport who had heard about the incident. They sat together at one end of the table, their expressions serious as they discussed the situation. "In my day, we came home to worse than this," Reynolds told them, his voice low, "which is exactly why we can't let it slide now. Things are supposed to be better." One of the other veterans, a Gulf War Marine with a prosthetic hand, nodded in agreement. "My nephew is serving now. Could be him next time." Kevin Chen, the young TSA officer who had apologized to Michael, arrived at the restaurant looking nervous but determined. He pulled Lisa aside. "I've given my statement to my supervisor," he told her. "I mentioned Officer Dawson's previous incidents too." Lisa looked surprised. "Previous incidents? How many? That I know of personally?" 3 in the 7 months I've been there. Always with passengers of color, always with some excuse about security protocols." Kevin's voice was bitter. "Most people just want to catch their flights so they don't file formal complaints." As they talked, more restaurant patrons were recognizing members of the group from the terminal. A couple stopped by their table to share that they had also witnessed the incident and had uploaded their video to social media. The footage was spreading rapidly across multiple platforms. Diana Peterson, the chief of security operations, entered the restaurant and approached their table. Her expression was a mixture of professionalism and genuine concern. "I just wanted to update you all," she said, addressing the group. "I've spoken with the TSA director and the airport manager. They're both taking this very seriously." She turned specifically to Lisa. "Ms. Wong, they've asked if you would be willing to share your recording for the official investigation." "Of course," Lisa replied. "But I want assurances this won't be buried or handled with just a slap on the wrist." "You have my word," Peterson said firmly. "And not just because of the public attention. This was wrong, plain and simple." As Peterson left, the group continued organizing their response. They decided to create a formal coalition to address not just this specific incident, but the broader issue of discrimination in security screening. By the time they dispersed, they had established clear next steps and exchanged information to stay in touch. On the plane, which was now halfway to Nashville, Michael finally allowed himself to close his eyes. The past 14 months had been filled with constant vigilance, staying alert for threats, monitoring patients' vital signs, scanning terrain for dangers. For the first time in what felt like forever, he let his guard down completely. He dreamed of home, the small backyard where his father grilled burgers every Sunday, his mother's garden with its rows of tomato plants, his sister's laugh as they raced to the creek behind their house, simple things that had kept him going through the hardest days overseas. When he woke as the plane began its descent, his phone was buzzing again. This time it was a call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Staff Sergeant Torres? This is Congressman Howard's office calling. The congressman saw what happened at the Atlanta airport and would like to speak with you when you have a moment." Michael was stunned. "Congressman Howard? From the Armed Services Committee?" "Yes, sir. He's very concerned about the incident and believes it may indicate a systemic issue that needs addressing at the federal level." After arranging to speak with the congressman later, Michael sat back trying to process this new development. What had started as a personal confrontation was quickly becoming something much larger. As the plane landed in Nashville, Michael gathered his belongings, including the repaired gift for his sister. He was one of the last passengers to exit, taking a moment to thank the flight crew. As he stepped into the jetway, he took a deep breath, preparing himself for whatever awaited him. What he wasn't prepared for was the small crowd gathered at the gate. His family was there, his mother, father, and sister, but so were about 24 other people, many in military uniforms or veteran caps. Someone had made a hastily written sign, "Welcome home, Staff Sergeant Torres, a true American hero." Michael's sister broke away from the group first, running toward him and throwing her arms around him. "You're all over the internet," she exclaimed. "Mom's phone hasn't stopped ringing." His parents embraced him next, his mother's eyes filled with tears, his father's handshake firm and proud. "Son, we couldn't be prouder," his father said, his voice rough with emotion. A local news crew was filming discreetly from a distance, but Michael barely noticed them. He was focused on his family, on the solid ground beneath his feet, on the realization that he was finally, truly, home. As they walked toward baggage claim, Michael's phone rang again. This time it was Lisa Wong. "I hope I'm not interrupting your homecoming," she said when he answered, "but I thought you should know. The TSA has placed Officer Dawson on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and they've announced a review of their training procedures." "That was fast," Michael replied. "Surprised." "It's not just the video, though. That certainly helped," Lisa explained. Kevin Chen came forward with documentation of previous incidents, and 3 other TSA employees have now filed statements supporting his account. "How is Kevin doing?" Michael asked, genuinely concerned for the young officer who had risked his position to speak up. "He's been temporarily reassigned to administrative duties for his protection, but he's in good spirits. Said to tell you thank you for the conversation you had with him. Apparently it made quite an impression." After finishing the call, Michael rejoined his family. His sister linked her arm through his as they walked. "So what exactly happened?" she asked. "The videos online don't show how it started." "It's a long story," Michael said, "but I think it might end up being an important one." Outside the airport, a small group of veterans had organized an impromptu welcome. They stood at attention as Michael approached, then offered crisp salutes which he returned with equal respect. "Word travels fast," one of them explained. "When we heard what happened in Atlanta and that you were landing here, we wanted to show our support." Michael was moved by the gesture. "Thank you, but this really isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," the veteran replied firmly. "What you did took as much courage as anything on the battlefield. Standing up with dignity instead of anger, that's the kind of example we need right now." As Michael finally left the airport with his family, heading toward home and the quiet celebration they had planned, his father squeezed his shoulder. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said simply. "He always said the true measure of a person is how they handle themselves when they're treated unfairly." Michael nodded, thinking about how a simple journey home had become something he never expected. The confrontation at the security checkpoint wasn't the battle he had trained for. but perhaps it was equally important in its own way. That evening, as news of the incident continued to spread across the country, Michael sat on his childhood porch swing, watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. His phone continued to buzz with messages and alerts, but for now he set it aside. Tomorrow would be time enough to speak with the congressman, to give statements, to figure out his role in whatever came next. Tonight was for remembering why he had served in the first place, for moments like this, for the people he loved, for the country that, despite its imperfections, was still striving to become better. 3 weeks had passed since Michael's confrontation at the Atlanta airport. The story had evolved from a viral video to a national conversation about respect, dignity, and the treatment of military personnel. Michael sat at his parents' kitchen table, reviewing his notes for the congressional hearing scheduled for the following day. "Nervous?" his mother asked, setting a cup of coffee beside him. Michael smiled. "A little. I've faced gunfire, but somehow testifying in front of Congress seems scarier." "You'll do great," she assured him, squeezing his shoulder. "Just speak from the heart like you did at the airport." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. The video of the confrontation had reached over 20 million views across various platforms. Veteran groups had rallied behind Michael, organizing a campaign to review security protocols at airports nationwide. The incident had struck a chord with people across the political spectrum. Some focused on respect for military service, others on racial profiling, but all united in the belief that what happened was wrong. Michael's phone rang. It was Lisa Wong calling for their daily check-in. "Just making sure you're ready for tomorrow," she said when he answered. The committee chairman confirmed they've added the TSA director to the witness list. "That's good," Michael replied. "Any update on Officer Dawson?" There was a pause on the line. "He's requested to speak at the hearing too. His lawyer says he wants to address you directly." Michael felt a flutter of unease. He hadn't seen or spoken to Officer Dawson since that day at the checkpoint. "Did they approve his request?" "Yes, but only after your testimony." "You don't have to engage with him if you don't want to." Michael considered this. "No, I think it's important to hear what he has to say." After ending the call, Michael went for a walk to clear his head. His neighborhood hadn't changed during his deployment. The same oak trees lining the street, the same cracked sidewalk where he'd learned to ride a bike. But he had changed, and now this incident had changed things even more. His sister joined him, falling into step beside him. "Big day tomorrow, huh?" "Yeah," Michael nodded. "I keep thinking about how different things would be if I'd just kept quiet or lost my temper." "But you didn't," she pointed out. "That's why people are listening." They walked in companionable silence until Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Captain Foster. "Just landed in D.C. Veterans group meeting tonight at 7. Car will pick you up at 6. The next morning, Michael stood at the entrance to the congressional hearing room, adjusting his dress uniform. He'd chosen to wear it today, not for the attention, but as a reminder of what this was really about. The dignity and respect owed to all who serve, regardless of their background. Inside, the room was packed. Journalists lined the back wall and the gallery was filled with veterans, many in uniform or wearing caps and pins signifying their service. Michael spotted Kevin Chen seated with Diana Peterson from airport security. They both nodded respectfully as he walked past. As Michael took his seat at the witness table, he noticed Doug Reynolds and several other veterans from the airport in the front row. Their presence steadied him. The hearing began with opening statements from the committee members. Some spoke about military respect, others about equal treatment under the law. When it was Michael's turn to testify, he took a deep breath and began speaking clearly into the microphone. "Thank you for the opportunity to address this committee. I want to be clear that I'm not here seeking personal redress or to vilify an individual. I'm here because what happened to me is happening to others, and because I believe we can do better." Michael described the incident in straightforward terms, neither downplaying the discrimination nor exaggerating for effect. He explained how the confrontation had made him feel, not just as a soldier, but as an American citizen. "When I was overseas, I told the people I treated about America's values, dignity, fairness, respect. I believe in those values. That's why I chose to respond the way I did." When he finished, the room was quiet. The committee chair thanked him for his testimony, then called the next witness. TSA Director Patricia Holland. Director Holland didn't attempt to minimize what had happened. The behavior displayed by Officer Dawson was unacceptable and does not reflect the values or training of our agency, she stated firmly. We have reviewed the incident extensively, including previously unreported incidents involving the same officer. She outlined the immediate actions taken: Officer Dawson's suspension, a comprehensive review of training protocols, and the implementation of new accountability measures. Then she announced something unexpected. As a direct result of Staff Sergeant Torres' suggestion, we are establishing a Veterans Advisory Council to improve our screening procedures and training. We've invited Staff Sergeant Torres to serve as a founding member should he be willing. Michael looked up in surprise. This was the first he'd heard of it. Next came testimony from airport officials, civil rights experts, and Veterans Affairs representatives. Each built upon the others, creating a comprehensive picture of the problem and potential solutions. Finally, Officer Richard Dawson was called to testify. He looked different from how Michael remembered him. Smaller somehow, less imposing without his uniform and authority. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. I came here today to address Staff Sergeant Torres directly, Dawson began, his voice unsteady. He turned toward Michael. What I did was wrong. There's no excuse for it. I let personal prejudices affect how I did my job, and I'm truly sorry. The room remained silent as Dawson continued. Since that day, I've been forced to confront some ugly truths about myself. I've begun diversity training and counseling. I'm not asking for my job back or for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your response that day, your dignity in the face of my disrespect, it changed something in me. Michael nodded slightly in acknowledgement, maintaining his composure though he felt a complex mix of emotions. He hadn't expected a genuine apology. After Dawson's testimony, the committee chair announced a 10-minute recess. As people filed out of the room, Michael remained seated, processing everything he'd heard. Director Holland approached him. We meant what we said about the Veterans Advisory Council, she told him. Your approach to this situation showed exactly the kind of leadership we need. Michael thanked her and promised to consider the offer. As he stood to stretch his legs during the break, he noticed Dawson standing awkwardly nearby, clearly wanting to speak but unsure if he should approach. After a moment's hesitation, Michael walked over to him. They stood face to face for the first time since the airport. Thank you for your testimony, Michael said simply. Dawson looked surprised. You're thanking me? After what I did? Owning your mistakes takes courage, Michael replied. We've all got work to do when it comes to seeing past our biases. The important thing is that you're doing that work now. They didn't shake hands or make grand gestures of reconciliation. This wasn't a movie with a neat ending. It was messier than that, more human. But something important had happened between them, an acknowledgement of shared humanity despite their differences. When the hearing resumed, the committee outlined their recommendations. New legislation to strengthen anti-discrimination policies at security checkpoints, increased oversight of TSA practices, and expanded training programs designed with input from civil rights experts and military advisors. As the hearing concluded, reporters surrounded Michael, peppering him with questions. He answered thoughtfully but briefly, emphasizing that this wasn't about him but about making sure everyone was treated with respect. Outside the building, a crowd had gathered, veterans, active duty military members, and civilians showing their support. Michael spotted his family waiting by the steps, his sister holding up her phone to record his exit. That evening, Michael sat in a quiet restaurant with Lisa Wong, Captain Foster, Kevin Chen, and several others who had been key to bringing the issue to national attention. So, will you accept the position on the Veterans Advisory Council? Lisa asked him. Michael nodded. I think I will. This was never just about one incident or one officer. It's about making sure these systems work fairly for everyone. Kevin raised his glass in a toast, to making things better instead of just getting even. As they celebrated this small victory for dignity and fairness, Michael reflected on how his journey home had taken such an unexpected turn. What began as a confrontation had transformed into an opportunity for real change. 6 months later, Michael stood at the front of a TSA training classroom. On the wall behind him was a new training poster that read, Dignity, respect, security. We can achieve all three. Today we're going to talk about how bias affects security decisions. Michael told the class of new TSA recruits, and why treating everyone with respect makes us not just more human, but better at our jobs. Among the trainees was Richard Dawson, not as an officer anymore, but as part of a community outreach team working to rebuild trust between security personnel and the public. Their eyes met briefly, acknowledging how far they had both come since that day in the airport. As Michael began his presentation, he showed a slide with a quote that had become something of a personal motto. True security comes not just from protocols and procedures, but from dignity, respect, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The confrontation that began at an airport security checkpoint had delivered justice in ways no one could have predicted, not through punishment alone, but through transformation, education, and the recognition that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is quiet dignity and a commitment to making things better for everyone.